when it comes to somebody like, how does somebody like Wasserman Schultz stay in power? If you look, if you grew up in the 80s, for example, or even the early 90s, like I did, Jen may have as well, and you did too. And what you do is
I was a little earlier than that. But
if you look behind the TV, and the way it used to be in the mid to late 80s when everybody got their Nintendo, and you had a VCR, and you had a stereo, and you had a TV, and they were all stacked.
Atari Betamax.
Look behind the TV. What do you see? You see about 50,000 wires all crossed together in an endless sea of just complete and utter devastation, as far as I can see. It's
Where
like,
are we going with this?
The
analogy.
Let me finish, please. What that represents is the absolute convolution within our system. It's how somebody like Wasserman Schultz interconnects herself like those wires. I'm connected here. I'm connected there. Well, the same thing happens in a place like Flint. Oh, listen, it's the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. It's their fault. They're the ones who did it. I got to look out for myself.
So can we find out? I want to go down the list of everyone who should be in prison, Jordan. Like, seriously, like.
Could I at least make my point?
It's just, okay, yeah.
Do you agree with what I'm saying? That a lot of the story here is that there is this sort of wires all interconnected in this complete entrenched system that everyone, especially anyone who's working for or in government, is always looking out for their own ass. They're not, I mean, they may sympathize, as a number of them say, listen, this is off the record. I think what they're doing is terrible, but I'm not going public with this because I got a career to think about. And I think that that was a very pointed message I came across from people all the way at the top to even all the way, to the former mayor of Flint, who knew what was going on and was like, well, Mr. Wallen just decided that he wasn't going to do anything about it.
I think why this book is so important, and obviously I'm biased because I wrote it, is I really think, our audience is, everyone kind of is on the same page. We live in a corrupt country, but there's different levels of corruption, right? There's your average, government selling city council to real estate developers. And then there's political payoffs to cover up the fact that your water is toxic and looking the other way as people are dying. Like the book, I did my best to meticulously show what I believe is the biggest government cover up of the 21st century, because this to me is the real Watergate, because nobody actually died from Watergate. Like Watergate was just a bunch of knuckleheads breaking into an office. In the book and the story at Flint, I mean, you're talking political payoffs at the highest levels of the government in Michigan, where the governor's right-hand man was trying to silence sick Flint residents so that it wouldn't get out that the water was toxic.
And if I may, a guy like Baird, that's a real sociopath, if not an outright psychopath, because that's how you have to be. You have to be completely devoid of any empathy to do what he did for his man, for the governor of the state of Michigan.
So you have political payoffs, not literally so that people would be left in the dark that they're drinking contaminated water. You had government officials destroying their phones right before the launch of a criminal investigation, just totally erasing their messages. You had government officials just straight up witness tampering with witnesses to get them, to lie to prosecutors. I mean, there's so many examples of just each little thing was a massive crime on its own. The payoffs, the witness tampering, destroying evidence. I mean, I got phone calls showing the governor himself was in on hiding the deadly Legionnaire's disease, which is like a deadly waterborne pneumonia. He knew about it 16 months before he notified the public. 16 months. So he knew that the residents' water was toxic and people were dying for 16 months before he opened his mouth. I mean, that is sociopathic, in my view, psychopathic. And so to me, this is not just a story of, politicians doing bad things to enrich themselves. This is literally politicians knowingly killing people to cover their ass. And no one has been held accountable for that. And I can't think of anything. And there's a lot of corruption in America. I can't think of anything that is more corrupt and more deadly than that. And why I've said that this is so important. This could not have happened. You can't have toxic water like this, and you can't have this going on for 10 years because it's still a disaster 10 years later without government itself being toxic. And while we're flooded with fundraising emails about our sacred democracy being at stake in this election, this is an actual example of democracy, what happens when it's removed. That's what happened here. Not to get too in the weeds, but the former governor in 2011 declared a financial emergency in Flint. It was very controversial at the time. Legally, I don't really think he was on solid ground, but he rammed this thing through. He appointed unelected emergency managers. They were basically like czars to take over cities like Flint. It was Flint, Detroit, and a couple other majority Black communities. And these czars, who were basically just puppets for the governor, they replaced their power, superseded the power of the elected mayor, the elected city council. And the first order of business, let's try and privatize the water system in Michigan. And that's what happened. That's why Flint was using the Flint River in the first place, because there was this financial scam to create a brand new water system that was going to be a privatized water system. And that's all. I can explain it if you want, but bottom line, while that new water system was being built, they said, let's save money by using the Flint River. And we won't, the Flint River, that General Motors had dumped its shit in for 100 years, and Dow Chemical and DuPont had dumped its shit in for 100 years. And oh, by the way, we're going to use the Flint water plant, which is the equivalent of like these Boeing planes that are falling apart midair. That's what the Flint plant was. It was not equipped to treat the water. So every step of the way, there was a 1,000% carelessness and recklessness because these are just poor Black people. So just use the river. We'll figure it out as we go. I don't think any of these politicians woke up thinking, how do I poison these people? I don't think it was that dastardly. But I also don't think they actually thought. I don't think the top thought was not health first. It was the balance sheet. How do we save money? How do we make money on this new water system? And to be clear, this is every level. This is the EPA is involved in this cover up. Several presidents, not just Obama.
Right.
The EPA, the state of Michigan government, the city of Flint government, Genesee County, which is the county Flint is part of. Then you have a very powerful private foundation, which is involved pulling the strings that caused this. And you have Wall Street banks. So to your point, Peter, this is kind of this whole dark cabal of all these cascading factors and all these entities. And to your point, Jen, no one is in prison. And I mean, I could start from the top, but I mean,
I am curious. I think we should have you should definitely do how they have the deck of cards that they use for the terrorists. When there should definitely be certain people that are on the crap list. But now that you have this information, does that in any way help any of these people with any civil claims? Because, I mean, especially I see that you obviously have spoken with Erin Brockovich. I mean, it's this seems like the kind of thing that now that there's evidence that people knew things that you might be, not that solves the problem, mind you. But is there any chance for any sort of civil action?
So there's been civil action, woefully inadequate civil action, but there's been a mass class action lawsuit that's been going on for years. A couple of years ago, the state of Michigan, under beloved MSNBC governor Gretchen Whitmer, settled for $600 million with the residents of Flint. That might sound like a lot of money. It's pennies. 200 million of that immediately goes to the lawyers.
Of course.
So it's really 400 million going to the residents. People that have crunched the numbers. I mean, basically each household might get enough to get a used car. So when you get cancer, you're screwed. They don't have Medicare for all or universal health care from this settlement. They don't have the services they need because children, I mean, you were mentioning it, Jen, but you got serious learning disabilities in children from from those heavy metals. There has been a rise in autism. I mean, regression at every level, reading, math, science, you name it.
Yeah.
Kids can't hold a job. Now, teenagers who were kids when this happened, there's a rise in suicide among teenagers in Flint. We all remember it's not so easy to be a teenager without the whole lead poisoning, but you add on heavy metal damage, it affects your mood, it affects everything: depression, anxiety, PTSD. So I mean, the settlement is hopefully inadequate, and the residents haven't gotten a penny yet. I also want to point out why I am trying my best to make sure people know this is an ongoing story. The EPA, 10 years later, has not admitted guilt or settled with the people of Flint. So that's Obama's EPA, Trump's EPA, Biden's EPA, and whoever wins. The EPA is on the hook, and I believe they're going to owe Flint a shit ton of money. They have not admitted guilt, and they are not settling. Flint still has a couple buckets where they could get money. The EPA, some of the engineering companies that were a part of this cover-up, but the biggest nut was the state of Michigan. And like I said, I believe it's crumbs. And also, part of what I'm hoping from this book, it's a hope, is there's a massive financial scheme that is still being covered up that caused this. And from the lawyers I spoke with, that financial scheme currently, as it stands, might be the only thing that is still possible for new criminal charges. So that's why the current Attorney General of Michigan, a Democrat, is basically trying to bury that. So I'm going to try to break this down so people understand it. The Flint water crisis at its core was a financial scam. Flint had gotten its water from Detroit for 50 years without a problem. But Detroit was raising Flint's rates, price gouging. So that gave local politicians, the Snyder administration at the time, the excuse, well, Detroit's charging too much. So they came up with an idea: let's build a completely identical, duplicative water pipeline that would run the same exact path as the water pipeline that Detroit delivered water to Flint. We're going to run it along the same path. The only difference would be the pipeline that Detroit sent Flint water to, it was treated water. So it was already chemically treated. The new pipeline would be raw water. Well, what do you need a lot of raw water for? Fracking, auto industry, agriculture, meat packing. I mean, basically they were calling it
water. It's your gray water.
They were calling it the blue economy. So this new water system is going to create the blue economy because businesses would get access to cheaper water. In fact, most of the water from this system wasn't even going to be used for residents. It was going to be used for business. But they were framing it as this is going to save Flint so much money as opposed to staying on Detroit. So at the last hour, Detroit didn't want to lose Flint as a customer because Flint was Detroit's biggest water customer. So Detroit offered Flint a 48% discount. So you go to the store, half off. Pretty good deal. If Flint was actually going to save money by staying with Detroit, but it was never about saving money. It was about creating a completely unnecessary new water system that was going to be privatized because everything's being privatized. So, but there was a catch. Flint at that time, because of all the things your channel talks about, my channel talks about, offshoring of jobs, deindustrialization. I mean, Flint was a rotting economic corpse in 2014. It had no credit rating. It was nearly bankrupt, and it could not legally borrow any more money. It was not allowed to borrow any more money legally because it was almost bankrupt. So, but for this new water system, the powers that be, including the unelected emergency manager, that czar, they needed Flint to be part of the financing to build a nearly $300 million new water system. So they created a fake emergency that would give Flint an exception to get around that debt limit to borrow $100 million. The former mayor said it best: how does a broke city borrow $100 million? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So they basically created this cockamamie fraudulent scheme to allow almost bankrupt Flint to borrow $100 million to build this completely unnecessary water system. And who issued the bonds?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Where is that from?
Well, JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. So the bank,
the fact that Wells Fargo is still standing after the shit that they put with their customers, it's like this is where I try to explain to people that until you recognize that Trump is merely a symptom of a completely bigger circumstance that you are refusing to see or just don't want to see, this system is broken. Like, our system is broken.
I'm just so sad. Like, and people have no idea what that's like to be stuck somewhere, what that's really like to be stuck somewhere. And
why don't they just get up and go somewhere else?
I remember that after East Palestine. Well, they should just move. Oh, yes, that's what they're going to do. They're all going to just get up and go. And they're going to do what with their properties? Because who's going to buy them? And how can they afford
that mortgage that they have on that house?
Nobody cares about that.